Welcome back to the Show My Scars podcast. I'm your host, Derek Duker. Today's conversation is with Krista Peryer. She was the incredibly talented and creative founder and CEO of the Geek Foundation. It provided free education, resources, and support to women, minority groups, and low-income individuals seeking careers in tech fields such as video game development, computer programming, and information technology. The mission was to help break down barriers and increase diversity in tech and create accessible pathways to high-quality future tech careers, and she was quite successful at it. She increased revenue by, a lot, over her 7+ years there. She won Most Influential Woman of the Year by the Springfield Business Journal in 2021. She won Outstanding Contribution of the Year at the Women in IT Awards in New York City in 2022. And she established a partnership with the Springfield Public School System to provide on-site STEM education to 40 fifth grade students through the SPS Choice Programs Academy of Exploration. However, in February 2023, it all ended. I'll let her talk more about that part when I get to our conversation. I met Krista at the Geek Foundation while working with Two Oddballs Creative. We were renting out a space in her building, and from time to time, I would have the pleasure of chatting with her. Immediately, I felt as if we were kindred spirits, and I was impressed with her outside-the-box thinking and drive to make things better in Springfield. So, I was shocked when I found out that the Geek Foundation journey had ended. Fast forward to a couple of weeks ago. I was leaving an appointment with my therapist. I had just unloaded all kinds of doubt that I would ever find myself back on my feet. I slide into my car and try to shake off all the emotions bubbling up, and I then do something you should never do in that situation. Open up Facebook. However, the first thing I see is a long post by Krista bearing her soul about spending years in therapy trying to recover from the death of the Geek Foundation. How she sent out application after application only to be ignored. How she's heard all of these hurtful rumors about herself. How all the stress has destroyed her physical health. And I felt for her so much, because I know how she feels. Since returning to the Springfield area a few years ago, I have bounced from job to job trying to get a livable wage. Any job that I got that provided one would quickly overwhelm me and flare up my burnout symptoms. At one stop, I had multiple panic attacks that were so intense I passed out. After the last one, an ambulance was called and I was told by management that if it happened again, they'd have to let me go. I then got a job at a local nonprofit newspaper in their marketing department, which was more or less a sales job, asking for quote-unquote donations in return for advertising. They told me they understood this was my first time in such a role and that I'd receive adequate training and a long leash in terms of how I got the job done. I didn't even have to sell anything within the first couple of months, they said. I quickly made a handful of contacts and got to work building a relationship with them and preparing to bring in some revenue. At the beginning of month 2, the president and CEO and my immediate manager called me in and said I was underperforming and my anxiety was getting in the way of me being successful. They gave me, I can't remember if it was a couple of weeks or a full month, to raise a certain amount of money for them to even consider keeping me on. But it was apparent they had already came to a decision, because on the day I would be meeting with them to have the discussion of keeping me around or not, they had already made plans to be out of the office. In fact, they weren't going to be around that week at all. Well, I'm kind of an asshole, so I pounded the phones and sent countless emails and reached their goal. And when I did, I sent an email to them and the entire board of directors telling them all of the above, and I let them know that I felt belittled, lied to, and I was quitting despite the fact I hit my goal. Since that last day at the paper about 2 or so years ago, I've been a freelance content marketer and I launched this podcast. All the while, I've been searching for a steady job that would better keep my bills paid and perhaps afford me the ability to get a place of my own. However, all I have gotten is hundreds of unanswered applications and dozens of calls from hiring managers declaring me overqualified. Of course, I always find those same jobs back on job boards not long after. I guess that person who was the Goldilocks level of qualified didn't work out, huh? Anyway, I reached out to Krista and told her my story and reconnected in a wonderful way. She offered to come on the show and share her story with you all. So let's get to that now. Here is my conversation with Krista Peryer. We kind of got together over a Facebook post that you had put out there, and it really resonated with me. It kind of sounded like the last half decade of my life a little bit. And first I want to thank you for sharing that, because that came at a day where I was feeling very alone in my struggles. And I think I messaged you. I'd just come out of therapy, and that was the first thing I saw. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, it kind of put everything into perspective. It let me know, I'm not the only one out there, struggling with finding a new purpose, finding a new career, and kind of where I fit in this area. So I want to thank you so much for sharing that honesty. It's not often that you see authenticity on Facebook. So thank you so much for that first. And thanks for joining me today.
And thanks for having me on here. It's really great to get to see you again, and and it means a lot to me that you shared that, that it kind of hit you and struck a chord for you, especially when you're in a dark place yourself, maybe that day, I think that's what it is for me, is creating opportunities for connection is really important to me, and I don't post a whole lot on social media, but I've been, going through a tough time the last couple of years after stepping down from my nonprofit, the Geek Foundation that I ran. And, I just kind of wanted to put that out there to say, hey, if you're going through these things, I'm going through them too, and you're not alone, so I'm really glad that you happened to see that. It was almost like the universe aligned in that moment for you to be able to see that and know that you weren't alone too, and so I was really happy that you reached out, and I'm glad to be here. This is great.
So we met when we were sharing an office. I was trying to remember for the life of me last night what the name of that building was. Do you remember?
I don't know the name of the building itself. I know it was, it's right there on the corner by the Bruco, but yeah, it was, that's how we met, because you guys had an office in our building, so rented a space from us, and that was really great to share that space with you guys.
Yeah. So that's kind of how we met. And then we were just, friends on Facebook for a while. We played some video games together.
Yeah, we've done some gaming. Yeah.
And then,
Fall Guys?
Yeah, Fall Guys. Oh my gosh.
Fall Guys was so much fun. It was a good game.
Yeah, and I watched you play in the office Untitled Goose Game. I remember that.
Yeah. Oh, that was fun. I was trying to teach one of my employees who had never gamed before. She had, her son has a Switch, so she had never played an Xbox before, which is what we had in the office. And I remember she was tilting the controller, she was trying to play Rocket League, and she was tilting the controller like a Switch, and I was like, nope, that's not how that works. And then I was showing everybody Untitled Goose, because it was just such a fun game to play with everybody. It was a really fun time, because it was really I really try to hone in on positive mental health, even when it's a workplace, and for me, that was a way to connect with my team members, to have a positive workplace is, being able to play games together, or sit down and we would play co-op strategy board games, for team building exercises, or, play video games together. So yeah, mental health is pretty important to me, whether it's in the workplace or at home or whatever. So that was a pretty fun day playing Untitled Goose with them.
And I just remembered this podcast. I hadn't settled in on it, but now I just remembered sitting at the desk in there, and I was jotting down names for this podcast. And I think we had a conversation really early on about it. But anyway, that enough reminiscing.
I digress.
Yeah.
I digress.
But yeah, he started the Geek Foundation, and I just wanted to kind of get a little bit of background on you, because that's something like it always amazes me what types of nonprofits or even just businesses that people come up with. What was young Krista like? Like, how did you get to be the person you are today?
Well, I, growing up had an interest in a lot of like boy things, to be honest. Like my mom had a best friend who we would spend, pretty much most of our days over there. And she had a son who was 2 years younger than me. So I got introduced, at a pretty young age to video gaming back on the Nintendo. We had an Atari actually even before that. So I got introduced even before that. For a long time I kind of gave him credit, but now I'm thinking about it. I had an Atari before that. So, but, I got, introduced to a lot of that stuff, at a really young age, video gaming. I got my first like Nintendo when I was a kid. I remember having the trackpad and the gun and all that stuff. And, then comic books, and, we would go to swap meets and buy G.I. Joe parts and make our own G.I. Joes. And like I'd play with Transformers and Barbies, so I was just a girl who had interest in both, boy toys and girl toys. And, growing up as a girl who gamed, I didn't know any other girls who gamed at all, really. Like I was pretty much the only girl I knew who played video games, And then as I got older too, I was also in like math Olympics, and I was kind of the tinkerer of the family. My dad would always have me put all the electronics together and, all that stuff. And I was just always kind of really interested in it. And as I got older and I started learning about programming, and computer programming and web design and things like that, I got really interested in that space. And I knew a lot of programmers, who are great friends of mine. They're guys, and, I don't think they meant anything unkind by it or anything. But, when I started kind of like pursuing that space of like, how do I get into this space? It was like, well, if you haven't been doing it your whole life, or, if you haven't been a tinkerer your whole life or whatever, it was all these like discussions about like, oh, it's too challenging. And I just remember like thinking, well, that sounds kind of silly, So I started studying the space, about 2009, so almost 20 years ago. I started studying tech because, like I said, I grew up as a gamer girl and, all those things. And really wanted to learn how the back end of it works, and wanted to understand it. And I was somebody who would have been perfectly aligned for that, honestly, being a math Olympics person and, math leader, whatever, and, having an interest in that. But I just always constantly was met with that, like, gatekeeping mentality, that we've all heard about. It's a stereotype that exists, and it exists for a reason, So, unfortunately, that's exactly what I started experiencing. So I started studying the industry back in 2009 and saw that there was like an immense amount of jobs available for like web developers and back-end programmers and video game developments, and like could just never fill the jobs. Like there's just constantly job openings, IT even, anything. And then I started studying and realizing that there was a massive amount of need for women in that space. It was very predominantly one gender, one race even, in the tech space. So I started learning, that there was just not this really opportunity. So around that time, maybe in like 2015 or so, I had seen about starting the Geek Foundation. The Geek Foundation was a nonprofit that was focused on getting women into tech. So we had classes in video game development, web development, and IT. And so I started the nonprofit kind of after studying that space and, had a lot of success with it until, I ran it for about 8 years, or so. And we did kids classes and things too. And, then I stepped down a couple years ago. So. Mm-hmm.
Do you feel comfortable saying why you decided to step down?
Well, I mean, it was a combination of several different challenges. We had a lot of success in a very short amount of time. We won our first grant for our like kids development, or our adult classes in 2020, literally the month before COVID hit. But we were able to have a lot of success. We increased our revenue by over 2,000%. I was able to bring people on. We had classes going. It was really wonderful. But there's a lot of challenges that come to nonprofit. It's kind of it's kind of a broken space because there's just a lot of hurdles to it, especially if there's not a lot of collaboration and there's not a lot of sources of funding, and and if you're maybe even like a newer nonprofit in a space that people don't really understand as much, yet, so there's a lot of challenges to it, but there's also a lot of challenges around boards and the interior running of it, and all that. Like, it's really challenging. There needs to be a lot better, like, things put out there of like education for what it means to be a board member, because I don't think board members really understand truly about what their roles are. People go into it with the greatest of intentions. They really do, and they want to help, but it's more than just an hour a month you show up, like, it's more than that. And you are kind of really responsible for the success of the organization, because it is your duty as a board member to come in and, make sure that the organization moves forward, help raise money, get word out, do everything that you can, to ensure the financial success. So it was like multiple layers of challenges, that we faced, and eventually it just got to the point where I, as a founder and doing multiple, everybody says in nonprofit space, you're wearing a lot of hats. And I certainly did. And, eventually it just got to the point where I was just massive amounts of burnout. I wound up in the hospital with chest pains, and I had to make that decision at this point of like, okay, do I step back, because my health is deteriorating now. I'm so stressed out all the time. I can't function straight. I don't even want to go in, half the time, because it's just so much stress. We also were kind of dealing with some hurdles too of hiring a construction company that trashed our place. And you guys were there at that time. And that was why you guys actually wound up moving out, was because the construction was a nightmare. So we had, just one hurdle after another, pretty much. And it just got to the point where like my mental health was, and I already have health issues, so my mental health was plummeting. And so then I just had to make the decision to step away.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, because that's, why I'm in a contract relationship with Gabe and Kylie now. I've told the story a trillion times, so I'll give the short version. But yeah, moving down here after, finding success as a sports writer and then ending up in marketing. And I've moved a half dozen times in the last, 8 years or something like that. And it's just, I got to a point where I was so burnt out, and the quality of my work just, fell off the face of the earth. And I couldn't figure it out. I was like, I can't even, I know I'm a good writer. Why can I not do this? And it was something worse than the fear of the blank page. It was like internally. And I started having panic attacks and things like that again. I've experienced those before, but for years they had kind of gone away. I always have had high anxiety, but, it all came to a boiling point right around that time. And, I went to a factory job just to try to get back on my feet. And twice they had to call an ambulance because I was just laying on the floor somewhere. And I'd wake up not knowing how I got there, or there was seemingly no triggers, but it was just the constant stress and fear and things, getting my bills paid, what's next for me. And finally when I moved back in with my mom a couple of years ago, I was like, I know for a fact that I have been wanting to get back into storytelling. I was like, damn the torpedoes. I'm just going to, start doing this and face my perfectionism, using, used equipment, all this stuff that you see here is pretty much used except for the recorder. But yeah, it started getting back into taking care of myself. How have you been doing with that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to just take a moment to say, like, I'm really proud of you for putting yourself out here and starting this podcast, and doing this. It takes a lot to, like, put yourself out there and tell your story. That was even the background of that post. I spent 2 years pretty much just, like, going through therapy and really struggling with what had happened to me, and kind of like hiding, and that post was putting myself out there. It was saying finally, like, I have to let this go. I need to put this out here, and I need to clear there, and I need to let this go so I can move forward. Because yes, the pressure to perform is very real in our society, and people don't often take account for how much stress or anxiety can demotivate a person, especially if they're already prone to mental health disorders anyway, right? Whether it's ADHD, anxiety, depression, whatever it may be, autism, anything. So when you're going through these really traumatic experiences, it can completely just put you on a path where like you can't function, you can't work, you can't do what you need to do to move forward. And our society is really unforgiving of that a lot of times. And it's really, really challenging because, then people start gossiping and bullying happens and things like that because people want to like make some sort of thing up as to why what happened to you happened or where you've gone or what's happened. And it's really challenging when people do that. It's adding another layer of trauma onto an already traumatic situation. So for me, when I left the Geek Foundation, I spent 2 years of going through this really challenging, it was really hard, because my entire identity had been wrapped up in that organization. Like everything I've ever been passionate about or cared about and everything that I've grown up my whole life, feeling I never fit in because I was a girl who was a gamer, and so then I really wanted to create this space for women to feel included, and to invest that much time and energy into something that just got, derailed the way that it did was incredibly traumatic, and I spent, time going to therapy and having a mentor that I've been working with for the last 2 years, and just, I was in some really challenging, dark places. I didn't know what I was going to do to move forward. I didn't know if I ever was going to be able to move forward again. I went through a flare of my health issue again. I have an autoimmune disease and I went through a major flare and thought I was going to die. It took me like 6 months to get out of it almost. And, it was a really challenging space. But eventually I was like, okay, even though this is hard and even though this is scary, people fail all the time. And I'm not even saying that I failed. I know that I made mistakes, because that was the first time ever running a nonprofit. There's definitely things I would do differently now, even if I'm running a business moving forward, but I started reading these statistics about like, startup like CEOs, right? Like most people that start a business fail up to 10 times in businesses before they find one that works for them. And so I started listening to these other stories of these people who didn't work out for one reason or another. Maybe even they made bad decisions or the other people that were involved, like, challenging boards or stakeholders or whatever, made the company difficult to run. And it kind of circled back to this mental health thing that I'd always tried to tell myself, when it comes to like relationships or friendships or life in general. If you're willing to learn from the things that you go through, it just brings you one step closer to finding that thing that works for you in the end. That business that succeeds, that relationship that thrives, that friendship that thrives, your health and everything. So, I really kind of set on this path. It was like last year when I finally just like hit rock bottom and I wound up at a mental health facility here, not a like overnight one or something, but I went to like try to go find like a therapist, and say, I need to move forward. And it was actually this like program that Burl has here locally, because I went to check into Burl and see if I could find a therapist there. They had this program called Solutions Focused Brief Therapy. And it's like short term and it focuses more on your positive aspects, like finding the things that are positive about yourself and that are motivational for yourself, and it's short term. So on a way, it's kind of like coaching, but it's still through Burl and it's still considered like therapy, and getting into that space and getting a mentor rather than just like always sitting, because I've been through therapy a lot in my life, I come from a challenging background and a challenging family, so I've been trying to understand myself for a long time. But sometimes for me particularly, it doesn't help me to just sit and vent all the time about everything going on in my life, because it keeps me kind of stuck in that, like, it just keeps me stuck in that space. Mm-hmm. So the like having therapy, having traditional talk therapy combined with this like solutions focused brave therapy and working with a mentor finally started to help me see like, and then listening to the things that I was listening to about, people starting over again and, not everybody succeeds at their first business, all that stuff started to help me kind of like finally come out of that space and be like, okay, I can do this again, because I am a serial entrepreneur. Like I am just an ideas person, 1,000%. I've always got a million ideas for businesses that I want to start and things I want to do, and that is just me. And I've learned to celebrate and appreciate that about myself rather than to beat myself up or feel like I'm not ever going to get anywhere with it. So yeah, it's been a lot of just processing. It's been 2 years of just processing what I've gone through, because there was a lot of challenges that I faced. It was competition and bullying from other nonprofit leaders. It was the challenges of, receiving state funding, and program implications of things that we weren't set up to be able to do. It was the construction work, going bad and challenges with board members. It was many things, and when you're faced with so many things like that at once, it's just going to burn you and your entire staff out. It wasn't just challenging for me. It was challenging for them too, and so I say that like, because when I'm not doing well, I can't be a great leader, and that makes it hard for my staff on top of what they're already going through, as well. So when I'm telling people, when I'm hearing about these like rumor mill things going around and gossiping and bullying and stuff, I'm like, you're not only doing a disservice to me and hurting me by the way that you're speaking, but you're also doing a disservice to my staff members who also went through this too. It's not just hurting me, it's hurting them too, because we all tried to do everything we could, to move forward and to work together. So it was a really challenging time, but now I'm coming out on the other side of it and can understand that sometimes things just don't work out, and then you just live and you learn from it and you do everything that you can to work on your own mental health and your own health, just body and health issues anyway. And then you move forward and start over again. You just put yourself back out there again.
What have been some of the best ways that you found to help ease the pain of that burnout?
Putting myself back out there again with like, because I isolated myself even a lot after that happened. I've been burned by people that I really cared about, and that I had trusted, and it was really hard to go through that. And so I kind of isolated, and I think that isolation also put me in a place where my physical health declined, and I got really sick again and everything. So part of that like growth through this has been going like, okay, this is really uncomfortable to try to like put myself back out there again and spend time around people. It's really uncomfortable to do that, but I have to, because social isolation is not healthy for anyone. We need relationships and people to thrive. Now I'm just making more conscientious decisions about who I allow into my life. I have been through a lot of stress the first half of my life, and I've been saying a lot lately, with kind of letting some of this stuff go with the Geek Foundation and moving forward, that, I had a really hard time with my family and things growing up too. And, I know that a lot of that was my mental health, and I did not know what boundaries or non-negotiables look like.
Yeah.
And for me, learning how to move forward in a healthier way is learning what boundaries and non-negotiables look like, and saying like, no, I will not allow these people into my life just because I'm really excited about collaborating or moving forward. I'm making conscious decisions about the people I allow in my life and who I want around me, and then who I partner with and who I collaborate with. Because, even when I started the Geek Foundation, I was just so excited to work with people. I was so excited to work with anyone, because I was so excited to be in this space and to like work in nonprofit and to collaborate, that I found out very quickly that just because people work in nonprofit does not mean it's all sunshine and rainbows, and everybody wants to help. There are people who are really competitive out there, and they're all competing for the same money. They're all competing for the same grants. And, so other sides of that too were, like I stepped away from church at a really young age because I had a negative, relationship with church. But I am somebody who is absolutely at the core of my heart, because, I became very jaded, during all that time that all these things happened. And part of that was figuring out who I am, and who I am at the core of me is someone who has a lot of love to give and who believes in that and believes in kindness and believes in respect and collaboration and community. And so I started seeking out people and situations that brought that out in me, and for me, it was finding a church actually that like aligns with my belief systems and has a core message of love and kindness rather than judgment and condemnation. It was starting to make friendships, with people and putting myself out there again. That's how you build and you grow past those negative experiences, by creating better experiences. I say a lot around this, for the last 2 years. It's taking these negative experiences and reframing. It's all about reframing. Even if you can take like maybe a song, right? Like, because we all know that like songs and scents trigger memories the quickest of anything, right? Mm-hmm. So let's take this for example. You've got a song that maybe reminds you of a past relationship that was really hard. And every time you listen to it, it just puts you back in that spot again instantly. Reframe it. Take that song and find a new memory to associate it with and reframe it. Make it a new experience for yourself. Put yourself back out there. Make new friends. Be conscientious about how you're opening up and what you're telling people right away, so that you're doing everything that you can to reframe your past traumatic experiences. I find that has been really helpful for me.
One thing that came up while you were talking, because it's been something that's been top of mind for me, especially moving back down here. And then, I had to make some tough choices. Actually, I've got 2 questions now. But one of the first things I realized was the way I made my mark coming up in the sports writing world was I said yes to everything and then figured it out later. That was like, I had heard that one time, put it into practice, and it worked real well for a long time. But then as I got older, I started realizing I'm putting myself in a ton of tough positions all the time. Mm-hmm. And then that moved into that started spilling over everywhere. I started being friends with anybody who seemed, maybe
friendly.
Basically,
Mm-hmm.
just a friendly person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How did you switch to saying no to certain things, but in like a kind manner? Because that's my biggest issue is I will have that like prefrontal cortex moment of like, don't do this. And I'm like, but they're so nice, or they're, whatever. And then I have a real hard time saying no in a way that feels comfortable to me.
Yeah, that's a struggle for a lot of people, right? Like, I think for me, I still struggle with it. I'm not going to lie, especially if it comes to like relationships, or things like that. Sometimes it just feels good to be wanted or to be, appreciated. So, it's really easy to say yes, to everything when you just want to connect, when you just want to have connection with people, right? I'm not perfect at it by any means yet, but I think the biggest thing is like really checking in with yourself, of like maybe if you said, because it takes time to practice, right? Saying no, right? And so like maybe you say yes at first, but then you take time to sit with yourself and go, but does this actually feel good for me? Like, is this actually bringing any benefit to my life? Is this relationship bringing any benefit to my life? Is this relationship making me feel seen or heard, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship, right? Like, and then really checking in with yourself. And then if you're checking in with yourself and you're finding you aren't feeling that, like, even as uncomfortable as it's been, because I have been a people pleaser my whole entire life, I will push back. Like, I will say, like, for myself, I'll stand up for myself and I'll bring those boundaries to the table and say, like, okay, hey, I'm noticing that this is happening between our relationship. Is this something that we can meet in the middle on? And if it's not, then as much as it sucks, you have to walk away, And then through doing that repeatedly, you start to just learn to say no, really quickly, you start to be able to say like, or just to walk away from something, like you maybe go on a date or something and you're like, this, it's sure it'd be great to have connection and hang out with someone, but this person doesn't really align with me very well. So I'm not going to move forward with that, or, hey, this person seems really fun to hang out with, but I can tell that maybe it's just going to be kind of intense for me, or maybe it would require a lot that I don't have to give right now, which is something I've started to really learn about myself, is that boundary of taking time for myself to not be on all the time, right? So that boundary might look like, I can tell that this friendship might require a lot from me and I don't have that to give. So I'm just not going to move forward with it. Like I could maybe be an acquaintance with them and hang out with them every now and then. But if they're asking me to constantly hang out, then I will be, I can stand up for myself and say, I'm sorry, I'm just really busy right now, or whatever that may be. We don't have to ever do it like in a mean way, or like, no, I just don't want to be friends with you, but you can just be like, you can say things that kind of create those boundaries for yourself of like, I really just don't have the space in my life right now to give that, or I really don't have the time right now, to be able to do that. And those are how you create those boundaries for yourself in a way that's not hurtful for other people, but really being true to yourself and checking in with yourself consistently, is what I've done, So for me, it's like, I have to catch myself when I want to just do anything and everything, just to hang out with people, just to spend time with people. And I have to say like, okay, is this actually going to be beneficial for me moving forward? Is this going to be beneficial to them? Like, am I going to be able to show up for them even? It's not always about you, it's about being able to show up for the people in your life in the best way you can too. And if you don't have that to give, you're not doing them any favors either. So part of that people pleasing comes down with like starting to really notice what you need and what you can give. And then, implementing that into your life more often.
Yeah. One thing that came to mind while you're talking about that is the handful of people I have in my life that I can, like when I know I need time around somebody, like I'm in my head too much or whatever, and I know that I'm not going to be the best, time. Like I'm so used to, like, I grew up the class clown and I could be at a funeral and attempt to make someone laugh. I'm pretty sure I've done that. It's
the performer.
Like, yeah. And it's funny you say that. I feel like that is like one of my personality traits is like, yeah, I see where there needs to be someone putting on a show, and by God, I'm geared up and ready. But that's exhausting sometimes.
Oh yeah, I relate to that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a friend group that I'm in that for the longest time I was like, that's who I need to be. And I remember I had just finished like quote unquote breaking up with my best friend at the time, or at least the person I spent the most time with. I found out, that it's not working. We just reinforce each other's negative mindsets. And so I started hanging out with this new friend group. And at one point I remember sending a text to one of the guys in there and was like, hey man, I feel like, I'm going to be a bad friend tonight. If I come out, I'm just, I'm going to be honest, I'm depressed right now. And went through the whole spiel, and he was like, I don't care. He's like, come out anyway. And there's a little bit of give and take there. You do not want to continuously be that person.
You don't want to continuously. Sometimes you need to get out and be around people to feel better. And I've learned to recognize that of myself too. When I need actually to be around people to feel better, and when I actually need just time to like be quiet and reflect.
Yeah, I think you want to be careful not to be a fortune teller or catastrophize the situation, but you can kind of gauge yourself and figure that out. Absolutely. It may take some time, and maybe a couple mistakes along the way, but you'll eventually learn that. Something else I wanted to talk about, we were talking a little bit about your kiddo before we started recording. I've got a 12-year-old myself, and something that I have been very cognizant of over the last couple of years is how do I show her the way out of something like this? Because something that I did not give myself the grace for going through any of the things I went for is that this stuff happens. Like, you're going to have a setback, and sometimes major setbacks where it seems like there's no way out, but there always is. The question I had for you is like, is that do you put on a brave face, or are you more real?
So my situation with my kids is pretty unique. I won't go like too deep into stuff, but there's been a lot of challenges with my kids, with them growing up and stuff. And when my son was 4 and my daughter was 10, I got diagnosed with a life-changing autoimmune disease. So I was hospitalized in 2015. That was actually what gave me the time and capacity to be able to finally start the Geek Foundation. Was I could not work anymore. Like, I was in the hospital for 8 days. I almost died. Like, they actually thought, my family thought I was not coming back. I weighed 76 pounds when I got out of the hospital, and I couldn't take care of my kids. And it was really hard, because I couldn't even walk up 2 steps to my door to get into my door. I was so weak and so sick that they thought I would be in a wheelchair potentially for the rest of my life. And I was a single mom, trying to go through and learn, like I said earlier in the podcast about like trying to learn with a really challenging family and not knowing what boundaries look like or what healthy relationships look like or anything. So as a single mom, trying to figure that out while being sick. And so I had to make the really tough decision when my kids were very young that I couldn't take care of them all the time. But through family and family friends, my son was also going through challenges at school that time when he started school, and things like that. So I made the tough decision as a mom to put him where he could be in a safe environment and to grow up with a mother and father figure there, and help him through school. So it was a really challenging decision to make as a mom, but I knew that kind of what we're talking about. If he's in the home with me all the time and I'm sick and I'm not doing well mentally, then I am, having gone through parents that it was really challenging with, I did not want that for my kids. And so that has given me the space for when I do show up for them and when I am there and I am spending time with them, that I can have a positive interaction with them. Like I make sure that my kids know that they can always talk to me and they can rely on me to be a level-headed person to talk to, because when you're going through that stress as a single parent, as a single mom, and you're sick and everything else too, you can't show up in that capacity. And I was just I had to break the cycle. I had to break the cycle for my own children. And it was a really, really hard decision to make. And then I made the decision about 5 years ago to step away from my family entirely too, because it was also just causing more stress and more mental health issues for me, which was perpetuating. I can say at this point that I 1,000% got the autoimmune disease I have, which is a gut-related autoimmune disease, from the stress that I was going through. And so all of those things have kind of played in together, right, to this then passion for building something that I was really passionate about and building this nonprofit, and then coming to this space where I got burnout and my health declined again, to saying okay, I have to have that midlife awakening, essentially. I don't want a midlife crisis. I've already been through a first half life crisis. I am, making these conscious decisions to learn from the mistakes that I've made and learn from the things that I didn't get as a kid, and then implement those for myself and basically reparenting myself, at this point. And then through that, being able to show up for my kids in a more positive space for them, right? So when it comes to being around my children and the way that I interact with them, I always try to show up from a space of making them feel seen and heard and thinking about them first, because I don't want them to go through what I went through as a kid and feeling like you're too much and that we should not, as parents, be putting our own struggles onto our children. And too many of us have grown up that way. Too many of us have grown up with all of our parents' problems on us. And then that's why we grow up as people pleasers. When you said that you were the performer and always trying to make people laugh, that's me too, 1,000%. I'm always trying to either make fun of myself or tell a joke or be witty, or whatever. That was my personality. That's who I identified as for so long. Yeah. And part of this midlife awakening, whatever, right, is taking a step back and going okay, I don't want to perform anymore. I just want to live a slower paced life where I can show up better for myself and the people around me and my kids and through that fix my health issues and my mental health issues, and then be able to show up even better. So, I kind of started moving into this space now of interest under like slower living, and I think a lot of people are actually starting to get there too. A lot of conversation I have with people is about like how much we are pressured to just be on all of the time, whether it's from work, social media, friendships, relationships, family life, all of it. Like we're all just, it's no wonder that we have, essentially an epidemic of mental health crisis, is because we are way stressed. I mean, all of my TikTok video feeds, they're coming up on Reels or whatever on Facebook, are pretty much all about high cortisol levels and constant stress and everything. It's because we're kind of starting to become aware of that and how to, maybe reparent ourselves and to start just living slower lives, connecting in healthier ways. And that in turn then makes your relationships with your kids better, because you could show up better for them when you're showing up well for yourself.
That part of the taking better care of yourself, it just acting out what you want them to see as an influence. And then when tough things happen, through meditation, being able to get that, I don't know what to call it, but there's that split second before I respond now, where back in the day it was just like whatever came to mind was what I was going to say, like if it sounded good. But now it's like I pause for a moment, and I think, like when she asks me a question or when I see something that I feel like I need to explain to her why I'm doing what I'm doing or whatever, it's like, what would I have wanted to hear as a kid in that same situation? And that has done wonders for my relationship with her. And I see a lot of the things that I didn't have as a kid coming out in her. And oh my God, it feels so good to hear her stand up for herself, or, sometimes not the greatest ways. I've gotten a couple calls from the principal, but it was, it's like, as a kid, I wouldn't have, the things that she says and does for other people. Today, I get here and I'm unpacking, and I have a whole pocket full of little notes she's written me. It's like almost
so
every
sweet.
Monday. I get
so sweet.
It is. I don't know how many times I've cried upstairs because I find something she's left, but today it was Fun Dip, so I'm looking forward to that later.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I think part of that actually comes from, like, I know we're like in a time period where we're all like just constantly bombarded with information, right? But at the same time, our kids are becoming, for better or worse, more educated too about healthy relationships. Like my 20-year-old daughter, I was talking to her the other night on the phone, and she was talking about her relationship, and her partner is an absolutely incredible human being, and I love them together. But she was, complaining for a second about some kind of, relationship thing or something. And I was like, well, do you know about like attachment issues, because some of these things can maybe, and she's like, oh yeah, I know all about attachment issues and avoidant, and I'm like, wow, it's because our younger generation is learning about a lot of these things at very young ages. So when we're able to kind of talk to them about some of these things, because I would say arguably it's hardest probably for people in our generation, right? Because we come from like growing up under parents from a different generation, an older mentality, but we're also friends with people that are younger. So we're trying to like bridge this gap between retraining ourselves new ways of thinking and also relating to the younger generation. So it's really fascinating because, they're able to kind of a lot of times meet us there because they've already learned a lot about this stuff that we're just now learning about. So in some ways, a lot of these things can be really helpful, that we are getting educated to the point where we're understanding ourselves a little bit better. So we can try to show up for ourselves a little bit better, and maybe break some of these cycles of trauma, and familial poverty and familial cycles of trauma that have been going on for generations and generations and generations because we didn't have the information before, to support us.
Talking about poverty, that's what we call a segue.
Sure. Yeah.
How have you been getting along financially? Because I know that I have been struggling.
Oh, yeah. It is really hard whenever you go through. I mean, to be honest, when I stepped down from the Geek Foundation, I thought I'll be fine. I've literally ran a company. I could go out and get a job, anywhere else. I pushed myself, because again, like I struggle with, because of my own mental health and my health issues, working in a traditional 9 to 5. I really cannot be relied on to be there. And the social stigma behind that, like somebody who can't just work a regular job, is really challenging to go through too, right? But I went ahead and applied, for all these jobs because I'm like, I have to make it. I have this apartment that I have to pay for and all of this, right? And so I applied for probably 400 jobs right after I left. And every one of them that actually did get back to me said the same thing. And they said, well, you're overqualified. You're overqualified. You're not going to be happy here. And I was like, I just need to work. Like, please just. And I remember somebody like literally telling me in a second interview, they brought me in for a second interview and literally said like, your nonprofit was just so amazing. Like, when are you just going to like do something for yourself again? Like, we'll support you when you do that. Like, but we're not going to hire you because you're just not going to be happy here. And I remember just thinking like, I just need money. Like, please just hire me. Like I just need to work. And they were like, no, sorry. Like you're just not going to be happy. You're not going to be fulfilled here. And I remember thinking like, I don't want to start my own thing again. Like that was so traumatic that I don't want to do that again. And I couldn't find work and it became really, really, really hard. And I lost my home. And then I've had to spend the last, couple of years doing roommate scenarios or staying at people's houses. And thankfully, I've had people that have supported me through that and have been there. But again, like when you're struggling already, and then you have that shame and that trauma behind not fitting into traditional social expectations, societal expectations, it's really hard, and that was what I think probably led me to that plummet of my health where I had that major flare again, and then had that kind of awakening moment out of that, of like, okay, I have to move forward. I have to move on with my life. I have to move forward. But yeah, I mean, it was really a struggle. I've, had to just do like bits and pieces of work, like freelance stuff and things like that to try to survive. And then, now I'm kind of at the place where I'm like, still struggling with my health issues. I just, do little bits and pieces of work to get by, but now I'm ready to like get to the point again where I can start something on my own again, and maybe build that into something and hopefully through that get my health better and not have to struggle as much, because it is, man, it's really hard when you're trying to make money and especially when you're trying to do this freelancing, and like I luckily have a background in marketing and web design and things like that too. So I was able to kind of like get some odds and ends jobs, through time. But like, even the part-time jobs that I worked with people that I've known that hired me on for a little bit, it was always having to tell people like, if I'm going to work for you, I have to have a very flexible schedule so that I can work when my physical and mental health is okay. And I know so many people I know, it's very weird, like how many people I've had around me lately that have ADHD. And the struggle that they feel to perform and the fear that they feel about losing their jobs if they're not performing well is really a challenge that we aren't addressing enough in society. And then there's people like me who like wanted to try to work and was trying to put myself back out there despite my health issues and despite my mental health because I was so worried about losing my home, and that I did. My worst nightmares came true with losing my home even after I lost my passion for my work, even after I lost everything that I'd built. So that just compounded on top of all the other stress of already stepping away from something that was my lifeline, but now I'm at a different space where I can look back at that too and say, okay, well, now I can see though that like maybe it was a blessing in disguise, because pretty soon after I left, all the big top tech companies, your Google, your Facebook, all those Meta, Google, all the big five, right? Like they all started massively laying off tech employees. Right? Because they had hired all these people during COVID and then they're like, oh, we don't need anybody anymore. So they started laying a bunch of people off. And then AI came out. And then that also started taking down the job market for tech jobs. And now everybody's removing their diversity and equity inclusion programs. So now the tech companies that are actually hiring are not looking to hire women anymore. They're not looking to fill that diversity space. I remember even when I was kind of getting started in that, Google literally had like an initiative within their company of like, how do we get more women into the space? People aren't having those conversations anymore, that's for sure. And also, like, we were a state-funded program, but we're in a conservative state, and we were a diversity, equity, inclusion program. So we probably would have lost our funding even. Now I'm able to be on the other side of that and go like, okay, maybe it was kind of a blessing in disguise, because I couldn't do it anymore anyway because of my health. And the market for tech jobs kind of has, for the first time ever in history since I've been studying this, I never thought we would get to a space where it's hard to get a job as a developer now, where it's competitive. I never thought we would see that moment. And here we are.
I've had the same issues everywhere I've applied to. Chick-fil-A, come and go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean anything. Mm-hmm. Anything that...
Overqualified.
Yeah.
It's the worst word to hear.
Yeah. And I was the same way. I literally, in one interview, I was like, you're one of my last hopes right now as far as the applications I have out there. Your schedule works with my kid's school schedule. The pay is fine. I am going to still work on, my podcast and everything in the evenings, or especially the weeks I don't have my daughter. This is perfect for me. And they were just, no, you're going to get bored.
Yep.
And I'm like...
Yep, I heard that too.
I'm like... That's,
it's like, why are you making decisions for me? Yeah. I just want to work. Like, and if you can't hire people right now, then why are you being... It was so frustrating to go through that. And I'm so glad that you had your family that you could rely on during those times, because I didn't have family to go stay with, so I just had to hope that somebody would help. And then going through what I went through on top of it, was really challenging. But sometimes, like I said, we go through these really terrible experiences. And I told my daughter this recently too, like, no one should have to go through these kinds of things to live and learn and get at a better place. But sometimes we just aren't raised with the tools to be able to live that way. And so we do go through those experiences so that hopefully we can live and learn how to show up better for ourselves, in the end. And some people don't. Some people never do that either. But I'm just a very firm believer in, like, yes, as long as you just live and learn, it just brings you one step closer to getting to the place that you want to be. And sometimes you have to do that on your own. And sometimes you have to struggle a lot before you get there. Sometimes, when you don't have those tools and that skill set to overcome those obstacles, you go through enough hard times and you're like, man, I am tired of this, I am tired of living this way. Yeah. So then you find what works for you. For me, finding what works for me is brainstorming ways to help other people too, with this, but like more like slower paced living, having a very firm boundary around I will not perform all of the time. And that was even something I started implementing when I was running the Geek Foundation, because it is my natural propensity just to want to, like, once I'm interested in something, just go, yeah. Right? And I had to start setting very firm boundaries even when I was running the Geek Foundation of, I will not work or look at emails or respond to calls or anything at night or on the weekends. And that's where I really kind of started learning about boundaries, was when I started setting those work boundaries, and going like, no, I can't do this because I will just be on all of the time if I don't set a boundary here.
This episode of the Show My Scars podcast is brought to you by Two Oddballs Creative. They're your guide to epic websites, storied brands, and rockstar PR. They're trusted by organizations such as the City of Joplin, Missouri, Club Blue of Springfield, Missouri, Vital Farms, and Advanced Concrete Technology, and of course yours truly. So if you're looking for someone to redesign your brand, build you a website, or get the word out there about your business, you can trust Two Oddballs Creative. You can get a hold of them by going to their website, twooddballs.com. That's the number 2, oddballs.com, or call them at 417-986-6332. Hey there, Show My Scars listeners. This is your host, Derek Duker. I just wanted to take a quick second to ask for a favor. If you don't already, I would greatly appreciate it if you would hop on over to Facebook and like and follow the show there. Or if you listen to me on YouTube, if you could hit the like button on episodes that resonate with you, or leave me a comment, it would help me a lot. Also, if you're looking for a way to support the show monetarily, there are a couple of ways to do that. If you're a business owner, I would love to talk with you about advertising on the show. I promise it won't break your marketing budget. If you're a fan just wanting to show support, head on over to showmyscars.com and check out the t-shirt I have for sale designed by a local artist. I've also got another one coming soon that will have my logo on it, and I can't wait to release that. It's going to be super cool. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say, so let's get back to the show. When you were talking about the shame, I was thinking like, yeah, not only just from the rejections or, just being ghosted by employers, but I'll never forget, I've been freelancing or whatever, but every time it seems like I start building up a little bit of that income, somebody has to back off. And so I was sitting there, jotting in my notebook what to do. And one of my brothers comes up to me, and my family's been out, not even just me, but a lot of our family members. We lost both my grandfather and grandmother within the last few months.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And my mom just got back from having, they think she's got bone cancer. And so it's been like a nightmare. And so me and my brother were sitting there talking, and like, how's not just, these individuals getting through things, but it's like, how do we do this? And and I felt like it was just kind of an open conversation or whatever. And so I'm, just, trying to teach him some of the things I've learned. And then he turns and looks at me and he's like, man, it would just really, really help out if you could figure your career out. And
shame.
The arrow to the heart that felt like. And I was like, you know what? I hope I do too. And I just ended that conversation.
Well, good for you.
Why?
Yeah, for handling it that way. I mean, because it's really hard when people put that shame on you on top of the shame that you already feel.
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking about that the other day, like how many relationships or bridges I probably burned because like I went into a job being really excited about it and then couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I just couldn't do it, whether it was health or mental health or whatever, and then disappointed those people, and then probably, they don't like me. But I had to wind up telling myself, like in situations like this, they just didn't understand what I was going through. They just don't understand. And that's not for me to hold on to. Just sitting with all of that shame and worrying all the time about what people think about you, which is another root of why I posted that post that I posted on Facebook. It was because it was like, I'm so tired of holding on to all of this, holding on to all of this shame and guilt and just fear and everything from the fact that like, I just didn't have the tools that I needed. The goal is to get there, right? Yeah, it is. Like the goal is to go like, yeah, I hope I do figure that out too at some point. But it's also about loving yourself enough and understanding yourself enough to go, maybe other people don't understand me and they're going to pass judgment, and that's okay because they don't know what I'm going through. And that was partially the reason I put that post out there too, is like, you have no idea what I've gone through. For me, it was, a big awakening moment. And I'm so sorry to hear about your mom, and I hope that everything will be okay with that. And I had put this in the post that I wrote too, but a big slap in the face moment for me was, I mean, I've struggled with these health issues with my gut autoimmune disorder and mental health issues and things like that too. But I do regular checkups, on things to make sure that like everything's okay. I get ultrasounds and CAT scans done regularly and things like that. And a few weeks ago, I was going through some really tough times, going through, kind of like just breakups and relationship stuff and, you know, all that too. And I went into the doctor's office and they'd done an ultrasound on my throat just to make sure everything was still okay and things like that, you know. And it turned out that I have a nodule that looks like it's thyroid cancer. And that was the moment that I was just like, I cannot keep living under this much stress all the time. My gut autoimmune disorders is an inflammatory disease. So like inflammation is just constantly going through my body all the time. And stress makes that worse. Mm-hmm. Stress is what causes that. Of course, it's also like diet and things too, right? Like if you're eating a lot of processed foods and sugars, which I did all the time because I'm constantly trying to get that high, right? So that I feel better, so that I feel better mentally. So a lot of my last couple of years too, you know, especially after I got sick again, was cutting out like bakery treats, you know, like I stopped eating like brownies and cookies and cakes and things, which I ate like all the time. I had a major sweet addiction because my body was just trying to like feel better, even if it was like for a moment, which is exactly what we're all doing with like social media and stuff, right? It's dopamine loops. We're all stuck in dopamine loops. But then it's causing all this stress in your body, then it makes everything else fall apart, you know? So inflammation causes thyroid problems. Thyroid problems start building, you know, nodules. And so it was like this moment from my doctor being like, you have to reduce your stress, you know? And you talked about meditation earlier. Meditation is fantastic, but when your brain is going all the time, 90 to nothing, and you're constantly overwhelmed, it is really hard. I know so many people that like struggle with, like myself included, with how to actually start meditating in a way that you can actually do it because you're just so elevated all the time. It's hard to get your brain to slow down enough to meditate. And through that, again, just like everything else I've talked about, it's just doing it over and over and over again until you get used to it, until you are able to do it all the time, you know? So that was that awakening, like that really like, wow, I have to let this go. I have to move forward with myself and I have to take better care of myself because I don't want to die at a young age. You know, I went through so much stress when I was younger, to be honest. And, you know, this is a mental health podcast, you know, so I went through so much stress earlier that I was never a point where I was like that far, but I definitely went through points in my life where I was like, why am I even here? Yeah. You know? What benefit am I even bringing to this earth? What is the purpose of me being here? And through this mindset shift, you know, of like, I do have things to bring to the table. I can make conscious decisions about who I allow in my life. I can forgive myself for the things that I didn't know any better at the time. I can not take on what other people think of me. I can reduce my stress. Then I started going, okay, I do want to be here. I do have a purpose here. I can find a new purpose. It's like a whole mindset shift, you know, of just going like, okay. And I still, believe me, it's like what we talked about earlier. Like you said, you notice yourself reacting less quickly with your kid. We all still have moments where we do get initially just like frustrated, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And we all have moments where we get sad again or depressed again or feel like nothing's working out again. But by and far, I have more moments of motivation and optimism now than I did before when it was just like everything is terrible and I don't know why I'm here.
Couple things there that just really resonate with me. You know, part of the generalized anxiety disorder I have, which seems like a very not specific diagnosis with what I deal with, but it's like constant rushes of thoughts and almost all of them negative. And, you know, I've dealt with suicidal ideation, but meditation at first was a nightmare for me. I started with a waking up app by Sam Harris and went through his intro thing and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be so good at this. And then I get to the first one and it was like the first thought comes in and it was something like, you goofball, you think this is going to help? And it was just like piling on. I got so frustrated and quit for a couple weeks. And then I noticed, I was like, man, I'm real edgy today. I wonder why that is. And it's like, well, I didn't meditate today. And then it took a long time for me to just dawn on me. It's like sitting down to meditate is you're not sitting down with the intent of not having thoughts, because if that's what you're doing, you're going to fail for sure.
Yeah. It's like trying not to think about a purple elephant when somebody says not to think about it.
Yeah. And so at some point it got to where I was almost like, if I sat down and I started meditating, I felt anxiety building up in my chest.
Mm-hmm.
I would direct my attention right at it and just like, what is this? And that's what I would say, because like every emotion that we experience, as long as it's not some sort of disorder and they're happening for absolutely no reason. You know, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I can't say, but most of the emotions that I experience, there is a reason behind it. Sometimes it's not an urgent reason and I can put it to bed, but sometimes it's like I'm feeling sad because I lost my grandmother or whatever. And if you resist those things, they're going to come back tenfold, and I'm going to have a panic attack.
Yeah.
If I push that away and I'm like, I'm not going to cry. It's like later on today, I'm going to cry pools of tears.
It comes up every time.
And so, yeah, the meditation aspect of it, and that's something I've been working on. I'm trying to get my certificate in that to try to teach others and to help myself out. There's still some parts of meditation that I can't explain to a newcomer, or, you know, I struggle with myself. But hopefully by the end of the year, I'll have that. And that's something I'm looking forward to try to.
That's really cool.
Help others out. Because I've had friends even that they're like, there's absolutely no way I'm going to sit with my thoughts for even 12 minutes.
No,
and I'm like,
most people don't want to.
I'm like, well.
Yeah. Well, and what I learned too is like building up is the key, right? Like, because for me, I'm one of those type of people who like, if I don't know what I'm doing, I won't do it. Like, I want to be educated in it when I go in. So like, one of the things for me, like starting out, like for example, with like yoga, you know, even it's like, well, what kind of yoga do you do? There's like 20 different kinds of yoga. It's like, how do you even know where to get started? You know, or with like meditation, same thing. Do I do the same meditation like that I listen to every day? Do I start with 10 minutes right off the bat? Do I start with 5 minutes? Do I do this kind of meditation? Do I do that kind of meditation? Do I switch it up? You know, it's so challenging. And like for me, I will overwhelm, and then I'll overprocess, and then I'll just freeze.
Yep.
I am a freeze person, 1,000%. So like, and that's the hardest thing, I think, when you're dealing with mental health issues, is starting a routine and sticking with it. Like that is one of the biggest challenges I've had, is like being like, okay, I need to start working out. I need to start meditating. I need to go to yoga. I need to do this. And then sticking it out, because when you're overwhelmed, exhausted, tired, sad, frustrated, unhappy, whatever, it is really hard to get started. But that was like what I've started coming to, is just like, I have to make myself do it even when I don't want to, especially when I don't want to. Because I read a great book, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but I can link you to it later. But it was a passage in there that talked about like, psychologically, our brains are wired to go to negativity first. And the only way to combat that is by reprogramming yourself to think positively first. So like, as humans, we just are biologically trained to go negative. But we can retrain ourselves through meditation, through positive thinking, through affirmations, through, you know, all those things, how to like stifle that negativity, how to like make it not be so loud. And that's what, you know, really all this process comes down to, is like reframing again, right? It's all reframing. And through reframing and through sticking through routines and changing up things and being open to things, you know, like I had to start taking a lot of supplements, you know, that I've been doing, and I'm starting to cut things out of my diet. And, you know, it's like the more that you do it, the easier it becomes. Just like setting boundaries, just like it all comes back to even the things that we talked about earlier, like how do you say no to people, you know, and all that. It all just comes through. The more you do it, the easier it gets.
Yeah. And if you still have questions about that meditation part, the answer is 5 minutes or whatever you can stick with.
Stick with it first and then build up.
Which meditation? I would start with, I call it finding your flashlight. And it's basically just finding the focus of your attention. And the easiest way to do that is, I feel the breath at wherever you breathe. If you're a mouth breather like I used to be, you'd feel it at the front of your lips, or if you breathe through your nose, try to catch it at the first tip of your nose and just work on finding the center of your attention. And then from there, it's like, what do you want to build on? Like if it's trust and love, or working on your relationships, it'd be like meditation and things like that.
Yeah.
But whatever it is you're looking to build up, there's almost always a meditation for it. And so I did not realize that when I first started out. So I was doing the same one and then got bored and then found reasons to stop.
Like everyone does, yeah.
Yeah. Once I got into this training, I was like, oh my gosh, I was such a dope. I was like, I knew all these existed. I read, I can never pronounce his name right, Thich Nhat Hanh, but I've read a bunch of different, long-time meditators' books and like thought I was the expert. And then there was like a stretch of several months I didn't meditate. And then at the end of it, I was like, what am I doing? But yeah, it's...
Well, you're right. A lot of people don't want to sit with their thoughts.
No.
I was actually because we were talking about some of this earlier, reading a study that said that men especially are I would rather go through physical pain than sit with my thoughts for any amount of minutes. It is so prevalent in our society, but then also just in the amount of overwhelm that we're all facing, so when we're at a point where people just do not want to sit with their thoughts or work on themselves, because all that fear comes up, or that anxiety or that stress or whatever, that can make it really challenging because you're not giving yourself the opportunity to experience or reframe, and to build new things for yourself, so it really is important to just sit with it and go this is uncomfortable and I don't like this, but I need to do this for the betterment of myself and others around me, and I'm so glad that you brought up the different types of meditation, because for me, being a person, like I said earlier, I very much firmly believe in love and kindness and community and collaboration. Loving kindness meditation is what I love. I love doing loving kindness meditation because it is me feeling like I'm giving to myself and to others. And I love the ones that are specifically think of yourself, think of someone that you love, and think of someone that you have a really challenging relationship with, and still give that, may you be happy, may you be safe, may you be loved. I loved that so much that I actually pinned that to the top of my Facebook post. May you be happy, may you be safe, may you be loved.
I was just about to bring that up. I jumped on your Facebook this morning to reread through that post you made, and I saw that and smiled. I was like, I wonder if she knows where that's from. Because,
oh, I do. Because I do loving kindness meditation.
Because I was like, how wild. I was like, I didn't know she meditated.
Well, and that came from that place too of going man, so many people have negative perceptions of me because of my career and maybe even my decisions with my children and stuff. But may they be happy. May they be safe. May they be loved. May they live peacefully. I can't do anything to change any of that. All I can do is work on myself moving forward, and just give love and kindness as much as I can, And so that's why I love loving kindness meditation so much, is because it's really helpful when connection is really important to you.
Yeah, and it's really good for yourself too. Because when I'm feeling depressed, I get symptoms of anhedonia, like a story I told my therapist one time. I'm a huge Chicago Bulls fan. Never ever had been to Chicago, number one, and definitely not the United Center. But me and a buddy one year, and it was when the Bulls were just god awful, and I was like, I wonder if we could get tickets for cheap to that. And I cannot remember why we decided we were going to drive to Chicago one week. But we look it up, and sure enough, tickets are cheap enough, and we're sitting, I can remember where we were sitting in the parking lot of AMC theaters here in town, looking at our phones. Then we just looked at each other and we're like, screw it, and we bought it. I'm sitting in the United Center hearing the intro that played when I used to watch Jordan. I'm hearing all that going off, and I'm sitting there, and the first thought that comes to mind is, I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling excited. I'm not happy to be here. I wasn't sad, but I was like, at best, I think I feel content, and alarm bells were going off in my brain. I was like, what is happening? We wound up having a good trip, and, I think of it fondly to this day and everything, but it scared me so much that I brought it up in the next therapy session, I'm like, hey man, like I'm not feeling positive emotions. And when I think about it, it's rare. Even to this day, I struggle with that. And so the one thing that I've used against that is meta, because that's one of the only things I can sit there and I can actually conjure up the feeling that I'm looking for. And yeah, that's one I pull out a lot. And the grounding ones are good for, if you're feeling an onset panic attack or things like that. But yeah.
And that's a very real thing too, right? Like when you're somebody who deals with anxiety or depression, like I've been that way as well myself, where I found myself in places often, especially in social situations, where I'm like, all these people are enjoying this. Like, what is wrong with me? Why am I not enjoying this? And for me, again, that's been a part of reframing, is going like, okay, I'm not enjoying this because I'm not present. So like, how do I become more present? How do I become more engaged? One of the things I struggled with a lot through my life is being on what I kind of like refer to as like autopilot. Like you're kind of always just like zinging. You're up here. You're like, you're very elevated and you're just constantly like, all the time. And for me, that made conversations with people really challenging.
Yes.
And maybe I'm ADHD too. I don't know. I probably need to get tested for that. But, paying attention when people are talking was really challenging for me. And so that would always keep me in this space of not enjoying the conversations or the social situations, because I was always feeling pressure to like, what am I going to say next? And so then making this conscious effort to really now, when I'm feeling that, like, because I'll feel stressed out in social situations because I'm like, oh no, I got to perform and I got to think about what I'm going to say next. And then I'm realizing I'm not even hearing what they're saying because I'm thinking about that. Now I'm going like, okay, if I don't enjoy that and my body's telling me I don't enjoy that, then maybe it's time to slow down, just actually listen to what people are saying now. Like pay more attention to hearing what people are saying, and through that have more positive interactions with people, and then through that break that cycle of not enjoying these kind of scenarios and turning into a more positive situation. Because it is so much reframing. I always kind of like say it like this: you can either sit in a place of fear or you can sit in a place of love, or dark or light, right? It's this classic like trope of all time, and it's a real thing, right? Star Wars, dark versus light, everything, right? It's all that. And there's that quote that I'd heard in church not that long ago, but basically it was like something about like the only way to get rid of darkness is with light. And so that's like kind of this whole path that I'm on now, is like in those moments of darkness, you have to bring in light. And so when you're not enjoying a scenario, when you're in a situation where you feel uncomfortable, it's sitting in that discomfort and going, okay, how can I be more present now in this moment so that I can find positivity in it and find enjoyment in this situation? And sometimes it's not going to work, and sometimes it's going to suck and it's going to be real uncomfortable, but you'll get through it. And then the more you do it, the easier it'll get. And then you'll find yourself being able to enjoy things more often.
I'm so glad to hear you say that about I've never heard what'd you call it? The zinging?
Yeah, zinging. Yeah.
I'm going to start using that, because that is...
Zinging. I'm up here all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, that is exactly how I felt. The only thing that saved me, and the only reason I can probably do this, is going through broadcast journalism training. I was so afraid of doing that, that at some point I found like being in the zone... What do they call that?
I know what you're talking about.
Deep work.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So, I just found this spot. Like, it's a feeling almost like where I settle in, and then I'm able to just look at them, and all I'm doing is just processing what's coming in. And I just have to sit there, and it is the best feeling of all time. There's so many social situations where I'll go into a room of people I don't know, and I'm like, and I just sit down and they'll all go around, and then all of a sudden everyone collectively notices that dude over there has not said anything. And I'm like, I was just listening.
Yep.
And then at that point, then I'm able to rejoin the conversation. Or sometimes I just like, yeah, you're right. And then I look at the next person like, your turn now, not mine. Like,
well, and it's interesting because like when you're somebody that functions on a higher level like that, like I do, I completely relate to that side of it too, right? Like in some spaces, I am so socially awkward that I don't want to talk and I don't talk, and then I'm in another situation where I'm talking to someone I want and I'm talking too much,
Yeah.
So it's like this weird trying to balance it. And what I've found for me, the balance for that is just listening and then having a conversation like a tennis match,
Yeah.
That's what I've started to like think of it as, is it has to be a tennis match. It can't be one person. Like I've had some experiences with people where I've started to learn that like somebody monologuing at me is a trigger, like where somebody's just talking at me forever about a subject, and maybe they're passionate about it or something like that, but it's a trigger for me because I get frustrated because now I'm like, this is not a conversation. We're not having a conversation right now. This is just you talking about something that you're interested in. And it became a trigger, and I started to realize it was because I was the person doing that sometimes. Because I am a nerd, and I could, like, most of the time I just like joke about it now, where I'm like, don't get me started talking about tech or space or video games or anything like that, because I will talk your ear off and you will definitely have like the glass over look, of like, oh gosh, what's she still talking about? So I kind of like trying to joke about it now and keep myself from doing that, because I realize how important conversation being a tennis match is, now. So, but it is strange because yes, I will find myself in situations too where I'm like, I don't want to talk to anybody. This is so awkward. I'm so uncomfortable. And I'm starting to force myself to go make conversation with people too, because you can't ever really get out of that, and you can't ever really make, friends or find those right people in your life, who are going to help you move forward if you don't do that, And you mentioned earlier, like losing friendships and stuff. I went through that too. I had a group of friends who had been my best friends forever. And as I was running the Geek Foundation, I started to realize those same things too about that friend group of like, we're kind of just holding each other back. I'm not really bringing anything to them anymore, and they're not bringing things to the table with me anymore either, that this relationship is not, it's just, we've grown apart. It's really hard when you step away from that group of friends that's been that lifeline for you for so long. It's like your entire identity again, right? Mm-hmm. And you're starting all over again. But, it's that like pushing yourself into those scenarios to have those conversations, or showing up to talk on a podcast, or, whatever it may be, that you can start creating more authentic connections for yourself moving forward. They used to always say all the time, when we were younger growing up, like, people don't change. People's personalities don't change. And now we're finding like that's not really true at all. You have actually so much information out there now and so much help out there now that if you're not consistently trying to grow and learn and change, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're just keeping yourself stuck. I really think that it's important to do the work and to try to learn what meditation looks like and things like that, because it, like you said earlier, if you keep it all in, it eventually comes out, whether it's through you wind up crying later that day, or you have anxiety or depression or whatever, or you have health issues. Somebody said something to me once, because I have this like little mass under my chin on my neck. And that's part of some of the evaluation that I was going through to make sure that that was doing okay. Somebody said to me, like, and this, I was at first like, oh, it's like chakra stuff or whatever, right? But somebody said to me, like, you have that there because like there's something going on in your life. And this person didn't know me at all, but it was like, you have something going on in your life where you have like had to stifle yourself. You've had to stifle like who you are, your word, your thoughts on things, essentially. And I was like, oh gosh, that kind of hit me in the feels, because it was like, I have my whole life being a people pleaser. And I actually am starting to believe that we hold almost every single person I know who's an adult that has anxiety issues or depression issues also has gut issues, and now they're finding that link between the gut and brain. And it's like, well, no wonder, like we all have so much stuff that's coming up in our bodies because we're overwhelmed and overstimulated to the point that it's causing health issues for everyone, whether it's mental or physical. There's a reason. Obviously food supply has a lot to do with that too. And that's why we're getting people with younger ages getting colorectal and colon cancer, but a lot of that too is just because we're holding that stress in and our brains can't take it, and then it comes out in the gut or in, other issues that start popping up, so it is really important, like you said, to address those things. Otherwise, it will find a way to come out, one way or another, it will.
One thing I forgot to ask earlier, and this sounds pointed at you, but it's pointed at me. But have you had any success like making adult friends recently? That is something.
It is much harder. I will definitely say that. But I am also someone who is driven on determination and stubbornness sometimes too. People would ask me all the time, why the Geek Foundation, why I started the Geek Foundation, how I got to where it was. And I was like, well, it's partial just passion and partial stubbornness, and determination, because I grew up experiencing a lot of injustice as a girl who was a gamer, and things like even now I still game online and I play predominantly male dominated games, PUBG, those types of games, right? Shooters. And I still, to this day, have to be careful about joining online people in chats, like in game chat, because I've had some horrible things said to me. Horrible things. And so, coming from that place of injustice, of like things that I have experienced and had said to me as a girl, in that space, it was like, well, when I heard, people being like, oh, it's too hard, or you haven't been doing it your whole life or whatever, I was like, well, that's stupid, So like, making friends, is hard because it's hard for me to follow through a lot of times, like to keep it going. But I'm also pretty good about making myself get out there and be determined to like make new friends, So I'm not above like getting on Bumble Friend Finder, and trying to find like women. Because for me too, I also grew up being friends with guys most of my life. And now I'm at a phase in my life where I'm like, I want more women around me. I want to find that softness and that slowness and things like that. And maybe slow down from a lot of those things that have kept me on all the time or kept me in a place of injustice. Like, I love gaming, but maybe I can have other things that I do too that are not so predominantly putting me in those spaces all the time. And so I will, try to go on Bumble Friend Finder and meet some new girls and go hang out with them and get drinks and stuff and, or go do crafting projects, or things together. And I joined a church again just to try to meet people, and I'll put myself out there. That is at least one thing I will say about myself to give myself credit is I am always willing to put myself out there. I'm always willing to set up meetings with people, to talk with people, to try to connect with people because I do love connection. But yeah, it is also hard to make friends as an adult because adults are busy. And for me, the big problem is, people are married and they got kids, and the women have, other stuff they got to do to take care of the family and things like that too. So it's always like, if I want to make women friends, it's hard to meet a girl that I can just be like, hey, you want to go out and go shopping? Because they're like, well, I got my kids and I got, this and I got that. So that's the hardest thing I think about making adult friends is just that everybody's busy. Everybody's got a lot going on. They're spinning a lot of plates, But is it impossible? No, I think it's totally possible. But you have to be willing to put yourself out there, number one. You have to be willing to follow through and figure out what that looks like for you, to try to repeatedly keep those connections going. And then you also have to be understanding that people are busy and they've got schedules and, you got to be able to work around that for people.
Yeah, I found getting it on the calendar.
Yeah. And I'm bad about having to cancel plans sometimes, too, because I've got my own stuff going on. But
right,
getting on the calendar is the first step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it started off like, it was just like open-ended, like, yeah, we should do that. Mm-hmm. And I did that so many times. Mm-hmm. And in my mind,
never happens.
Anytime I say that, I meant what I said. And then I've quickly realized other people aren't sticklers for grammar and proper word choices. And I'm like, okay, now it's like once I say that and they agree, I will pull my phone out and be like, so looking at, and then you can just see them like, oh.
We're actually going to do this. Yeah, the panic sets in and they're like, oh God, we actually have to do this now. I totally get it. But I mean, I'd said before, like I'm an ideas person. So I'm always constantly trying to think of like new ways for connection. I know some of, we talked about this of like the pressure of overwhelm and societal stuff is I've taken a new interest in an area of like an umbrella of interest for me is the tech space, obviously, right? And so like it's about like safe and inclusive technology, because my initial thing was getting women into tech and I was able to do that, right? and able to make it more diverse. Because we also, branched our programs out later, into including men from different backgrounds as well. I was able to kind of do that. And now I've taken this interest over the last couple years in what technology is doing to us now on a mental health level. And, so to combat some of that. So we have social isolation, which is weird because we're more connected than we ever have been. But, in order to try to combat some of that, I'm always pitching ideas to people of I like to play D&D. So I'm let's get a new D&D group together, Dungeons and Dragons, or I'm pitching the idea of a women's meet up once a week to my friends of let's get together and play cards. They used to do that in the 50s and 60s, let's have a game night, where we routinely every week get together on the same night. We make food, we hang out, we have drinks, because we are more isolated now than ever because we're addicted to our phones. Technology can be so amazing because it can educate us in ways that we've never been able to be educated before. There's a good and a bad. There's a good side and a bad side. It can be used for good or it can be used for bad. And, it's the same discussions we're having right now about AI and all of that, right? But right now, the way our technology space is set up is actually really bad for us, So I've been studying that space for a little while because I like to study society almost from an anthropological perspective, how things make us relate to each other and how, that may hurt us or grow us, moving forward, things like that, So I really like to study it from a bigger picture perspective. And so I started learning, as I've kind of shifted this focus from women in tech, because the tech space is getting better for women. We're up to almost 30%, of women are in tech now. It's not where we want it to be. And it may never be a completely equal pairing, but we're better than it used to be. And I got to contribute to that. And so now my focus is kind of starting to shift towards how do we make tech safer from an inclusivity perspective? And the inclusivity side of that is for people who want slower paced access to each other, who want just a slower paced way of connecting, because everything that we have right now is set up to keep us addicted and keep us going all the time, so it's actually this psychological mechanism that tech companies are using called variable ratio reinforcement. And basically it acts like slot machine mechanics in our brain. So social media and online dating apps are the actual two worst for it. You keep scrolling constantly or you're swiping constantly. And then it creates dopamine loops in your brain, which we were talking about earlier, and it keeps you addicted. It's in everything, though, that we have right now. Those are the two worst platforms for it, but it's also in streaming platforms. It's also in e-commerce. It's also in AI chat stuff. I mean, AI chat stuff can be great, but we're already starting to see studies coming out showing that people's capacity for puzzle solving and for solving stuff is getting bad because they're just literally using ChatGPT to solve everything for them. It can be fantastic on the side of the fact that it can offer, therapeutic resources when you don't have access, or you can use it for a small business owner to do all of the things that you can't do all by yourself. Or I got to tour a local school center for autism, a school for autism once, and the CEO of that organization was telling me about a story about an 18-year-old kid who wanted to be a paleontologist, but he didn't write well. And so they were able to use AI to help him, overcome that barrier. And he was able to get into a college. So it can be used for really great reasons. But the way that it's set up right now, unfortunately, is meant to keep us addicted. And there are apps that use variable ratio reinforcement in positive ways, like Duolingo or coding things, because they use them in a way of rewarding you for doing a good job and sticking with something, right? But it's still at the end of the day allowing you to disconnect, right? Whereas Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all of those things are literally just designed to keep you wanting to do it all day long, And I've had days like that where I'm I didn't do anything today and I literally was just on social media all day. And that, guess what, brings up shame, right back at it, So, I have a really big interest in this, how this fits into the mental health space, because how do we start disconnecting? how do we start creating those opportunities for building friendships organically again? People don't do like lost watch shows, like watch parties anymore. People really don't like, hey, this new show's coming out. Let's get together every week and watch it together. People don't really do that anymore. People don't do game nights very, very much anymore. It's like, and even for me, online gaming is a great way for me to connect with friends long distance and is fantastic. But would it be better for me to be able to sit and hang out with them in person? 1,000%. I much rather enjoy like person to person conversations because you can read body language. You can, you're just getting the vibes. It's a tennis match, right? But when you're doing it online or through a headset or, through social media messaging or whatever all the time, you're not getting any of that positive interaction that you get person to person. And Messenger and chat things, and phones, everything is all designed to, you need to respond right away. And we don't create authentic relationships through that. I have a lot of friends, like I said, who are ADHD or whatever, that have talked to me about that. Of like, I really hate Facebook Messenger because I feel this constant need to like reply right away. And if I don't, that person's going to be mad. And everything is set up like that right now. Creating relationships, I think, will get more authentic and easier even as adults when we find ways to do it again organically. And I think we have to start stepping away a little bit from the constant addictive apps to do that. I mean, and that's a whole thing even with like online dating apps that, geez, you can go into a whole podcast probably just about that.
Yeah.
But how are we supposed to create authentic relationships, even romantic relationships with people, when the second you get frustrated at someone, you go like, oh, I can just go find somebody else on an app. And then you're just constantly scrolling again, Yep. And it's addictive. It's addictive, especially to people kind of going back into attachment theories I was talking about earlier. It's especially addictive to people who are avoidant attachment or anxious attachment because they're like, well, I don't have to really connect with someone if I can just talk to them on dating apps or whatever, right? I don't really have to work on myself or work on relationships if I can just find somebody new, And so I really think that relationships, and whether they be romantic or friendships, or even work relationships for that matter, will get easier the more we find that organic way to connect again.
Before we started, you said you were working on something new.
Yeah, I'm actually have found a purpose again, and I'm working on, something that I'm building for myself. Again, I won't go too much into details because I don't want to give anything away yet, but it is focused around that. It's focused around positive variable ratio reinforcement. It's focused on slow tech, and how we can connect in ways with each other that doesn't create so much pressure. Because we still do need that like online connection, right? Because it's a great way to connect with people who you don't have an opportunity to see face to face all the time. But I'm really starting to move towards the space of, that umbrella of like safe tech, inclusive tech, right? Because so much of it has been set up for so long to be just really beneficial for the people who are making it and the people running the companies doing it, and we're kind of learning a lot more about that too now, with so much of like the tech space getting involved with politics now too. I was listening to a great podcast. This podcast that I had heard about from my pastor called If Books Could Kill. And this episode that I was listening to yesterday was about the space of the gender gap, in education and mental health between boys and girls. And it was talking about, the fact that like we're all so disconnected now that it's becoming really hard, to overcome those barriers of disconnection. But it's because everything around us is designed to keep it that way. Everything around us is designed to keep us divisive. And they were kind of talking, about a lot of like even the bro culture and like tech, right? And when they're like, well, now we're kind of learning because of that like exact thing that I literally started the Geek Foundation to overcome, that bro culture. Now we're starting to learn the negative effects of that, through all this stuff that is just keeping us addicted to things, right? So it's really interesting, And I think we really kind of have to start having those conversations, which a lot of people have been coming to me and talking to me about too. They're feeling overwhelmed. They're feeling exhausted. They're feeling like they want something where they could connect to each other, but that isn't so much pressure. So many people around me are echoing that same sentiment, that it's like, okay, then how do we start creating those more organic connections? How do we start creating that more like slower paced technology? Discord is the one that's like actually pretty known for being a slower paced thing, that a lot of people use right now. Discord's great because you can step away, but it's still a way to connect. But things like Messenger and chat and Instagram and, all that, man, there's just a lot of pressure to respond immediately all the time. Yeah. Texting, goodness gracious, like how many people talk about like in relationships, like, oh, that person didn't respond to me right away, so that means they are not interested. They aren't putting in the effort, so they're not interested. And it's like, oh my gosh, we have to stop thinking like that. We have to stop expecting immediate gratification all the time. But it's hard to get out of that because everything that we've been programmed to use for the last, 10, 15 years especially, has been about instant gratification, dopamine loops. Yeah. It's pretty wild.
The live or whatever it says on Messenger, the little green light letting people know you're on.
I turn it off a lot.
My goodness. At first I was excited about that because I almost used Messenger as texting back when, actually I may have mixed up my timelines here, but at some point, and it took a long time for me to get on a 21st century cell phone plan. So I was paying for text. So I was using Messenger. So knowing when people were actually on was helpful. But now it's like people are abusing that and then accusing people of like, you saw my message.
You saw my message and you didn't respond. And I mean, I believe that there is absolutely like a mutual ground to that, right? Like if you send somebody a message and it's somewhat important, and they don't respond to you for 3 days, then you're like, okay, now I have to figure out, like, I got to set a boundary, I mean, because maybe that relationship with that person just isn't in that space right now. So I think that there's like a middle ground, with that. But the fact that we just immediately like, oh, you read my message, so you didn't respond right away means you're a jerk, is just a wow, it's a really challenging space. And so much of like reels that pop up in my feed are about that kind of stuff of like, this person didn't respond to me right away, so like they don't care, they didn't put in the effort that they cared. And the reality of it is just that people are busy and they've got their own stuff going on. And I think that like, now on a positive side of that, one thing that I do appreciate about Messenger is like, before when I was going through a lot of mental health struggles, and I'd be awake at night because I couldn't sleep, or I woke up in the middle of the night, could go back to sleep again. Sometimes it was reassuring to open up Messenger and be able to see other people on. Because I was like, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one who's awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. So sometimes it's reassuring because it can like create a sense of connection, even if you're not talking to them, because you just know that other people are out there going through the same thing you are. Yeah. But yeah, I as by and large, I think the negative sides of that probably are starting to outweigh the positive sides of that. Yeah. It's really, when you think about it, the main benefit that comes out of Facebook completely is your ability to connect with anyone. That's it. And what kind of really started setting me down that path of like studying this and getting more interested in this was like, I started noticing the vanity of it, and the song and dance of it, of like, I could post something meaningful, educational or informational or whatever, and it would get like 2 likes. But if I post a picture of my face, it'll get 70 likes, and it's like, what? This is so messed up. So then it's that constant need for validation that becomes addictive, right? And then we're constantly feeling like we need to post pictures of ourselves or do things like that to get that validation from other people. And it just becomes the song and dance of it. And it is not healthy. And then the pressure to instantly respond is not healthy. And then the divisiveness that it creates. I was listening to a speaker. We had a speaker at our church last week, and he was talking about all these things, and that made me go like, oh, I need to connect with him and maybe talk to him too about some of this work that I'm doing. But he was talking about that like all these platforms are set up to literally keep you into that, like keep you stuck in that loop too, right? It was just a really great conversation, that he was having, or a great speech, I guess, that he was giving about how it's created so much divisiveness now that it's created these echo chambers. So like you will be friends with people in your political group, right? And then the ads and things like that, things that start getting shown to you, just keep you in an echo chamber, right? Or they specifically target things to you to make you angry. Mm-hmm. So like it will be one or the other. It's not set up in our benefit at all. And he was giving statistics on like how much that's created divisiveness throughout time. And it was like from the 1970s, because now it's created disbelief in educational systems and any type of like government systems and things like that, right? And it was like, just since like the 70s, our trust in each other has plummeted. And our trust in institutional systems has also plummeted, so I mean there's really not a whole lot of benefit that's coming out of social media apps other than being able to connect with people that you can't connect with, in other ways, family that lives long distance or friends that live long distance or whatever. But I can't really see a whole lot of benefit coming out of it other than that, because even the news that you're getting is also targeted specifically for you.
Yeah, and so many people just the headlines are all they look at.
Yep. And it's a lot of disinformation too. Yeah. A lot of disinformation and misinformation. So it's both. So a lot of it is just really not helping, which is also leading to more mental health issues too. Especially in our younger generation, because they're getting all their news now from TikTok. It's wild. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very disheartening for a former journalist.
Right. Well, and for a former journalist and from even anybody that works in like marketing and all that too, right? Because like it's about, I mean, to be honest, like I've been doing marketing, and graphic design and web design and all that for 10 to 15 years, which is why I went back to it after I left Geek Foundation. But I'm at that point even now where I'm like, I think I'm good, like because it's a constant song and dance. And especially when it comes to marketing, when it comes to keeping up with SEO tactics and what Google's changing now to fit that song and dance and what the newest trends are and all that stuff. I mean, I've heard so many people say of like, oh, I really want to get rid of Facebook, but my business. And I'm like, I hate that that's the only thing that people can rely on anymore, because I'm that way too. I mean, honestly, I tried to delete my Facebook page recently and I was like, dang it, I don't have access to marketplace or events anymore. How am I going to know what's going on? So like someone I know, him and I were talking about like, at one point, like maybe we should just start up an app that's like just specifically for events. So, cause like people want to get away from a lot of these social media tools. They just are going to lose access to a lot of things that people rely on now. It's really challenging. Like, how do you find the balance, you know? And I think that is kind of what it all comes back to, is just you have to, like, learn how to say no. And you have to learn, like, for me, I can very easily sit on Facebook all day long and just scroll. But I've had to start being like, nope, I'm going to put my phone down and I am not going to pick it up for a while. I'm going to consciously make an effort to break the cycle. And that's what it all comes down to. It's just breaking the cycle.
I'll be interested to see what you might come up with.
Thank
there.
You.
That'd be cool.
I'm really excited about where I'm going from here. And I'm actually even thinking about stepping into coaching in that line too. Mm-hmm. Like helping people start breaking the cycle, you know? I think it's a thing, that people are looking for, is like, how do I start just disconnecting more?
Is there anything that you were looking to plug, or is there, if you're looking for any freelance work or anything like that for people to reach out to you for?
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely getting to the point where I'm like, I said, I'm not like gonna put myself in a situation where I'm constantly seeking out new clients anymore. But if people come to me, I would still happily do website design and marketing and stuff for them, because I do enjoy the creative side of that a lot. Like, I really enjoy being a creative person. But as for, where I'm going in a direction for what I'm building, not yet. But that'll be coming soon. So I am working on some new ideas and building some new things up, but yeah, I'm not there yet.
Yeah, if somebody needs to hire you for a project, where should they reach out to you at?
Well, obviously you can find me on Facebook. My last name is spelled Peryer, which you got my pronunciation of my last name right, which never happens. I have an ongoing joke with my friends that nobody ever gets my first name or last name right. So I've, at this point in my life, just started to answer to whatever people call me. So they'll be like, Krista Peryer, and I'll be like, yep, that's me. Like, Kristen Pryor, yep, that's me. My last name is Peryer. First name is Krista with a K. And you can find me on Facebook or, reach out to me at my first and last name at gmail.com.
Thanks for coming on and sharing your truth. That it meant so much to me, and I felt like this would be a perfect opportunity to talk to somebody, because I haven't shared like everything with my story. I never know when I'm oversharing, or like if I'm feeling a way that not everyone else is feeling, so maybe I should be quiet. But when I saw your post, I'm like, okay, that this is happening everywhere, as I suspected. And so I wanted to have you on and just kind of go back and forth, because and real quick before we hop off, one last thing I wanted to talk about was like, especially for our city, and maybe there's not a good answer to this, but like, how can we better support people like us? Like, because Springfield's a special place where it's like there's blue collar jobs everywhere, and there's definitely like the tech here and some creative stuff. But it seems like, when we get you're not going to have fun here, I'm like, well, I'm here because I couldn't find where I belonged at. And so I'm starting to wonder, is there something institutionally going wrong here or being overlooked? And if maybe you had an opinion on that.
Well, I can really only speak to like the nonprofit space, like professionally, obviously like a lot of that is that there's not enough money to give to, we have over, it was like 2,500 registered nonprofits in the 417 area, and they're all competing for the same grants, and they're all competing for the same money, and so, it's twofold. From what I saw in my experience, a lot of it was difficulty collaborating. Like when we first won our first grant, like I said earlier in the conversation, I love to sit down with people. I will reach out to people all day long and set up meetings to schedule with people. I do great one-on-one. I love to learn. I love to listen and learn from people. And so I would set up all these meetings with grant makers and funders and stuff, and they were all saying the same thing. And this was right before the COVID pandemic hit even. And they were like, people here have to start collaborating more. They have to start working together and then applying for things together. They're like, the funding is going to dry up, and I saw the course of that. There were definitely like some, funders and stuff that like their funding dried up because they put it towards other resources, or certain grants that went away that used to exist before, so speaking from the nonprofit side of things, it's twofold. It's going to have to be less about competition, more about collaboration, and more funding opportunities, or seeking funding opportunities outside of the scope of Springfield, and in the tech space too. It's a highly competitive field, I mean, everybody is all trying to make it, and they're all trying to hire people, and they're all trying to survive, so a lot of it is just really coming down to collaboration, finding ways to collaborate more. And I do know, like, we have Springfield Tech Council, that people can get involved with, tech-wise, and there's a Women in Tech, program here and stuff, too. But a lot of my experience just came from seeing a lot of competition. And I think, the more that we collaborate and we create community, the less there will be a need for that, for sure.
Well, thanks again for coming on and sharing your story. It was super great to reconnect with you. It had been way too long.
It had been, yeah. It was almost over 2 years ago, at least, that you guys were in the office with us. So
yeah, and I think we maybe played Phasmophobia or something like one time.
We'll have to play that again. That game is so much fun.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it, and we'll have to have you on again soon if you start your own venture.
I would love
to have
to
you back on.
Yeah, thank you again for bringing me on here. It was an absolute pleasure.